Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and this is my weekly news roundup. Not really a news service, just a roundup of what I can steal from other sites and quickly talk about. I'm going to cover the week 14 July to 21 July. A little bit of an intro. It is a little late this time. My work life, the people who actually pay me, is all going a bit crazy at the moment. So I took this, which can take a little time to put together, moved it to the back end of the weekend, and I brought forward my collecting video, which was a bit shorter, a bit sharper, and put that out on Friday. So if anyone was waiting desperately for this news roundup, I apologize. I suspect that's not the case, so I think I'm safe. For those of you who haven't seen one of these before, this is my highly biased opinion of what's interesting out there in the news this week. I don't pretend that it's comprehensive. It's stuff that I found interesting and I thought was worth sharing, often because I fear it might have been missed by someone else. If you're as big a nerds as me, you've probably seen some, if not all of this already, so I apologise. I will occasionally inject my own opinion into this. After all, what's the point of having a YouTube channel if you can't use it as a soapbox to shout your own opinions on sometimes? So with no further ado, let's get stuck into it, and I'm going to talk about the watches that I've seen come out this week. And so the first watch I'm going to talk about has popped up in a few different places, but I'm going to show the screenshot I got from Monochrome, and that's the new Panerairadomir military-inspired green dialed thing. Okay, so as I said, it's very military inspired, nice, everything classically Panerai around it, except for this very matte green finish. On one hand, there's nothing particularly special about it. It is yet another iteration of the Panerai. Same case, same sizes, going all the way up to 48mm in some iterations. Same dial, nothing much happening. There are a couple of different versions, manual wind, one with a GMT, one with a GMT and a power reserve. They come in a couple of different sizes and a couple of different materials, stainless steel and ceramic, I think they come in. But on the other hand, it is sweet looking. This is a really good looking watch. At 10 to 12,000 US bucks per watch, you'd want it to be. Okay, so I'll go to the Hodinkee site now, and I'll talk about what Hodinkee do, which is the Hodinkee thing, and bring out a special version of a watch. And in this case, it was a special version of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms Bathurst scarf. And look, given the base material of a Blancpain 50 Fathoms, could it be anything other than stunning? Probably not. And Hodinkee didn't disappoint. It is a stunning watch. It is. You start with something beautiful, add a little bit of extra class to it, and it comes out looking gorgeous. But the good news is that you don't have to worry about this anymore, because it's a Hodinkee product that was all sold out within about 5 minutes. So it's not really worth checking out. If you do want to go look at it, what you missed, go to Hodinkee site and just thank your lucky stars you missed out on spending $9,500 US. Okay, so back to Monochrome now, and another watch that was announced that I saw on that site is the Girard-Perregaux 1966 Blue Moon. I'm really unsure how I feel about this watch, and it's got a real sense of Audemars Piguet Code 1159 about it for me, and bear with me, I'll explain why. It is modern, it is clean, it is going to be beautifully built, but for $9,500, $9,000 US, is that enough? And that's where I get to with this Code 1159 type thing. Is there enough going on to justify that kind of price? Now, I suspect that it's not at its best in the photos, and I suspect that, like a few reports I saw with the 1159, people that held it in their hand and got to see it in the flesh were much more positive about it than people who simply reviewed off-screen images, which tended to flatten out that quality that comes through from, in that case, an AP product, and in here a Girard-Perregaux product. So I'm going to reserve judgment, but just looking at the images, while they're very nice, and I'm not sure if there's enough in these images, and I worry a little bit about the reception it's going to get. What I would say is, before you harden up on anything on this, try, if you can, to see one in the flesh before you go hard on whether you like it or don't. Now here's something that is massively out of my swim lane. Saw this on Watches News, and that's a new Vacheron Constantin Patrimony Day Date Retrograde. That's a mouthful. This watch has been around for a little while, but this is a really serious update with some new dial colors and new ways of showing the complications that it's had. And in this case, it's kind of like the photo negative. This shows what the Vacheron here, unlike the Girard Perregaux, which kind of doesn't necessarily put its money in front of you, the Vacheron very much puts the money that you're spending on display. You can really, I think you can really see the money in this shot. It's very easy to love. The blue is perfect and it matches the gold just beautifully. The day and date display is both interesting but also really clean and easy to read. So that's a challenge for watchmakers to get. And flip the watch over and have a look at that movement. It's typical Vacheron and just stunning. That said, this watch is 44,000 euros, so it'd want to be something pretty special. It is massively outside my swim lane, but it's just such a gorgeous watch, I had to bring it up. Okay, so this next one is not actually a new watch. It's been around for a little while, but I'm going to mention it because it kind of links to something I spoke about last week. Last week I spoke about a company, Timur, a German manufacturer out of Saxony, who I'd noted had two sides. They had this very specifically tooly side, and they've also got this particularly kind of dress oriented side. And in the dress side, they get a lot more into manufacture movements and manual winds and fancy decoration. I wanted to bring this up because not a lot of people have heard of Timur, and this week there was a review of one of the other side of that company. It's high-end dress, manual wind end. And so go over to Deployant, and there they have a review of something that's not new, but it is something that many of you won't have heard about before, which is the Timur Patria Admiral. So this is very much the upstairs gentry to the downstairs worker bees of last week's Flieger. So go to the Deployant site, check out that review, and you'll see the other side. Noting that this is a watch, even though it is kind of the other side, it's the dress, it's the high end, it's the manufacturer movement, it still only comes with a 5,000 US dollar price tag. So it's actually not too bad value, and I think it's worth looking at. Finally, a watch which is actually much more in my swim lane and much more the sort of thing I'm more likely to look at and potentially buy, and that's the new Boulder Expedition. Okay, so the Expedition didn't come out on any websites. In keeping with its micro-brand roots, it shows up because suddenly there's every YouTuber and his dog seems to have been sent one, except me because I've got like no subscribers. And so suddenly the reviews start popping up everywhere. That's a key to go have a look at the Boulder site, and sure enough, there's a new Expedition for sale. It's a weird watch in that it's kind of a field watch trying to be cool wearing a dive watch case kind of thing. So it is definitely a field watch, but as I said, it comes looking a lot like a dive watch. Inside it there's a Sellita SW200 movement. It's got 200 meters water resistance, sapphire crystal, interesting 3D printed dial, and this really nice stepped dial and internal bezel feature. So in my experience, their watches are very, very well made. And it's now available if you get in and pre-order at $499 US. So that's an astounding price. And I think it only goes up to like $599. So I think that's actually a pretty compelling offer if this is the sort of thing you like. Now, funnily enough, for all the positivity I've said, I'm probably not going to pick one of these up. It's just not it's in my swim lane, but it's not a style I like, so probably not for me. But yeah, go check it out, and if it is your sort of thing, jump on it. It looks like a good deal right now. Okay, so in industry news, it's the end of June, end of July, so it's the half-yearly reporting period, and there's a lot of companies putting out half-yearly results, and the Swiss industry the Swiss industry body, FHH, has put out some mid-year reviews, so they're popping up all over the net, and there's some analysis of that going on. There's probably so much in that's worth a whole episode on itself. but I'll hit some of the high points right now. Okay, overall the Swiss industry is up 1.4% this year compared to last year. That's not bad. It would have been much better, but it was held back by a shocking June result. The June results were terrible across the board, falls in pretty much every sector, but particularly in the entry level, the like sub, a couple of thousand franc and down bracket. I'll put some slides up it'll show you that, and you see kind of the impact in that clearly if you look at the price, but also if you look at the materials. If you look at what happened to steel watches, which is clearly going to be the base entry levels more often than not, they just got decimated in June. There was a number of reasons for that. One of the massive places where this hit was in Hong Kong, and that's really being linked to a lot of the civil unrest that happened in Hong Kong between the local Hong Kong community there and the Chinese government, all about their special status. Some more takeaways though about sort of what you can drag out of some of this mid-year analysis. Monochrome had a couple of articles, first off looking at Swatch, saying that Swatch has actually not had a particularly good period. Both sales and profits are down. They got smashed in the low end. That entry-level brand, those entry-level brands of Hamilton, Tissot, Swatch and Mido really took a bit of a pounding. And look, I don't think they're going to go away. I think it's unlikely that the probability that they'd be closed or shuttered is vanishingly small. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some movement from Swatch in just at least trying to rationalise that. They can't kill those brands, but maybe it's just they might try and stem the bleeding a bit. There was some interesting notes though in the just little throwaway lines in the Swatch, both in the Swatch report, its own annual report, and in the reporting of that by Monochrome, where there's this little note that's saying that Swatch has also taken a bit of a hit in terms of trying to attack grey market sales. Okay, so if you're a big brand and you want to get your products out of the grey market, how do you do that? Well, principally you slash production and you end up selling a whole bunch less. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of less sales is that production's just been cut and they've removed a lot of the junk sales that were coming from Swatch factories to dealers and then immediately being shunted off to the grey market because it would never sell at retail. It could be that Swatch is kind of turning the tap on that a little bit and simply not overproducing as much. Time will tell, but that was an interesting little thing. Monochrome then went in to talk about Richemont, and they seem to have absolutely nailed it. They've had an amazingly good first year, solid and occasionally double-digit growth across the board. Not as affected, I suspect, because they don't have they're not as exposed to the low end. I think they've got Baume & Mercier at the bottom end, the entry end of the Richemont category, and their pyramid very much looks like this. You've got Baume & Mercier here, and then more and more brands as you go up, whereas Swatch tends to be more like this with lots of brands at the bottom and coming to a smaller apex. So interesting times ahead, and if this trend continues about sort of the hollowing out at the low end and the expansion at the high end, Richemont's looking pretty good, and Swatch has got some work to do. Okay, so moving from the watch industry news into watch media, and it's a pretty gradual shift here because I'm going to still talk about something I saw in the watch media about the watch industry, and that was a really good article. I'm not sure exactly where it came from or who wrote it, but it's on a blog. When I say it's not sure, there is a byline on this article on a blog to watch, but it feels like it was written by someone from within the Swiss industry, not by the actual author, or not by the byline author, so it's a bit odd. But anyway, in a blog to watch, there's an article from the French Horological Society, FHH, looking at trends on what's happening in the marketplace. And it sort of it builds on some of the figures that I just spoke about, but then adds some contextual discussion around it about other things that seem to be happening in the industry as a result of these changes to sales. And what they're basically saying is that there's less focus on cheap watches, and there's less equating cheap with value. And instead, as things are happening in the marketplace, as consumers are getting more confident with spending money, which is questionable, but it is something that this article postulates, then what's happening is consumers are looking for actual value, not just cheapness. And so what's happening is they postulate that that's what's underpinning a lot of this move to increasing quality, increasing move to insourcing, manufacture movements, that sort of thing. It's about the Swiss industry realizing that people are more confident to spend their money, and rather than focusing on getting the cheapest watch out there using an ETA movement, they're best off enhancing the value, even if it is also enhancing the price, by increasing the quality of their output. I'm not sure if I entirely agree with it, but as I said, I haven't done enough analysis here to kind of argue the point. So what I would do is I'm going to point you all to it and say, go have a look, because it is interesting and it gives some interest. It gives some pointers to where we might be going next. Okay. Next in the watch media, Hodinkee. It is, some of you might have noticed, apparently we landed on the moon about 50 years ago, and Omega has occasionally mentioned that their watches were the watches that went to the moon. There were in fact lots of other clocks and watches that have also been into space and been to the moon. It is illegal for them to talk about it, apparently, but it just doesn't happen a lot. Over at Hodinkee, Jack Forster did an article, quite a long, in-depth, and because it's written by Jack, beautifully written article around every other watch, clock, timekeeping device that has been sent into space and to the moon. Really recommend it. Go check it out. Fun read if you're a particularly geeky person like us. Now, over at Time and Tide, there was an article which was probably actually seriously more fun, and that was, they did an article on the 5 Instagram watch cliches that need to be cancelled. And by cancelled, I mean killed. There is a real theme that emerges, so go check them out, but I'll quickly run through the 5 things and what I saw as the theme that underpins it all. So the first group of the first group of 3 were, please can we stop taking photos of car interiors and watches. Please can we stop taking photos of fistfuls of all different watches, particularly the same watch in all sorts of different precious metals. And finally, can we please stop with the obnoxious travel shot of your expensive GMT watch next to your business class ticket and your legs stretching off into it forever. I think the common thread in there is, can we please just calm down the conspicuous consumption and showing everyone that, yes, you've got a nice watch, but you're also a dick. I think, and I'm on board with that. Funnily enough, I don't see a lot of those images, mainly because I tend to just unfollow anyone who posts them. But clearly they're out there, and I'd suggest you, and I'm with Time and Tide on that one. The next one is what they called the boob and babe shot. Again, it's not something I see, I've heard about. And I heard about there was some company, Meridian or something, did a really classless ad campaign. But this is essentially combining a pedestrian shot of a watch with some sort of sexually exploitative photo. Again, I don't see a lot, because if you do post those, I tend to unfollow you and I never see them again. If there is anyone out there still doing that, can you please not? And the last one is interesting, and that is the wrist roll. The wrist roll is really popular. Lots of people do it. I don't, but that's not because I'm philosophically opposed to it. It's because I'm too lazy to hold my wrist, and while I'm doing the camera, I can't kind of work it all out. Their point is that it's just a bit tired and it's just a bit boring. I don't know. I don't do them. I don't mind them. I'll let others be the judge of that. Next, what I'd say is, in the media, you're seeing something I referred to a couple of weeks ago, where I did a video about the rehabilitation of quartz and the way that quartz seems to be becoming more and more acceptable within this serious watch community. And there's two articles this week that sort of bounce off that idea. One was Worn & Wound did a big article on a pair of quartz powered Grand Seikos with the 9F movement inside them. Yeah, one of the things I'd also add is that continues another theme which I've mentioned, which is Worn & Wound and some of these big American flagship media flag heads really having something of a love affair with Grand Seiko at the moment. I strongly suspect, as I said, that Seiko and by extension Grand Seiko are pouring some serious effort into their marketing for the first time in a long time, and this Worn & Wound article is yet another example of that. Also over at Fratello, what you saw was there's a really good test of the Longines Conquest GMT, VHP GMT. So that's their very high precision GMT watch. That uses an ETA movement, but it is, as the does what it says on the tin, it is a very high precision movement. Off my top of my head, I think it's 10 seconds a year. It's basically the same level of accuracy that the base Seiko 9F would give you. And it's the watch, it's the movement that turns up in things like the Breitling Emergency and watches like that. And I think this really reinforces some of the things I was saying in my previous rehabilitation of quartz video, which is that I think we're all fine with quartz if there's a reason you're using it. If it's not just to make a decent watch cheaper, or if it's not just to kind of worse, make a really cheap watch but be able to sell it for a high price because it's got a name on the front. I don't think that's kosher. I think that's where much of the toxicity in quartz has really come from. I think when a company says, no, what we want to do is we're making a watch which is going to be very high quality, but where precision and ease of use is core to its role, that's got quartz written all over it. And I think where we see quartz being used in that way, it's much more acceptable and easier to deal with. Okay, so over on YouTube now, there's the guys at Clockmate. Now, I've mentioned them before. I've pointed at individual videos. And over the last couple of days, or the last week and a bit, they've just nailed it with another 3 videos. There was their review of the Seiko Alpinist. They did a review of the Tudor GMT. And then they also did a little thing about if watches were cars and equivalents there. Now, I don't think I would offend them if I was to say they're not watch geeky type people. They don't know everything there is to know about watches. You aren't going to, it's not like a Tim Mosso experience. And I mean all of that in the best possible way. These two guys bring a really fun, easy to listen to podcast almost kind of vibe. And it's really refreshing, and it's a nice antidote to people like me that can run the risk of taking this all too seriously sometimes. So as much as it pains me to say this, because we're in a race to get to 1,000 and I think they're going to beat me, go over, check them out, subscribe. They're really good. And yeah, as I said, they're a very light and fun way of getting involved in something that can be a bit dreary if people like me aren't careful. Sticking with YouTube now, I'd ask you to go over and have a look at Mark over at Horology House. Now, I do a little bit of photography, and I would generally I sell some stock photography and stuff like that. Now, I would generally describe myself as a travel photographer, or a street photographer, or an available light photographer. All of those are really fancy ways of saying, 1, I'm a bit lazy, and 2, I'm not particularly good at a lot of the technical craft stuff. I don't have the patience to really work with things like lighting, to understand how it all works. I didn't own a macro or any kind of artificial lighting until I started doing this. Mark over at Horology House is the complete opposite. He's really good at what he does. He's got probably, I would say he's probably got the best watch imagery going, certainly on YouTube right now. So for just plain old watch porn, go over and see Mark at Horology House. It's fantastic. But it's not just gratuitous watch shots. there's actually real value in doing the kind of work he does, and that really comes out now with the shot he's done of the latest, I can't remember what it's called, but I'll put the screenshot up so you can see it, JUL dress watch. It's a perpetual moon phase something. And in there, what you see, and he reveals something I found myself, and I'm doing this macro work, that when you dive in and you start looking at watches really close, you begin to get a sense of just how much or how little care was truly spent on your watch. And a watch that can look okay from a distance, or it's got a few rough edges, but you can kind of look past it at a distance. Up close, you can see exactly what's going on. And you get a great example of that in this review that Mark did of the JUL moon phase. And that is, from a distance, it looks fantastic. In fact, even 99% of the dial looks brilliant. But because of the way he does it, because of the way he takes photos of these watches, you get to see the little blemishes and the flaws. And in his case, I'm not sure, he postulates that he's found a defect which might be surface rust, and it could well be. I was also thinking maybe it's a lubricant or a sealant that's leaching through. I don't know. But what it does show is that there's a flaw in this watch. Was it there from build? Was it there as a result of a service? I don't know. So the thing is that these close-up shots, these close-up macro shots, aren't just sort of gratuitous glamour shots of a watch. They really do serve a purpose, and they tell you things you wouldn't otherwise have known about these things. And frankly, right now, no one is doing that better than Mark over at Horology House. Go check out the one he did on the JUL Ultra. He did some really interesting stuff about Rolexes and what a Rolex looks like right up close too. So yeah, go check him out. It's fantastic. So in podcast land, probably the two pieces of news that caught me here were one is from a guy doing his essentially first ever podcast, and the other one is from a pair of girls who haven't even done a podcast yet. So the first one was Adrian from Bark and Jack has decided that he doesn't want to appear on Scottish Watches anymore, and he's going to do that. He's going to make sure he doesn't have to deal with them anymore by just running his own podcast. And so he started doing a podcast in addition to his other multimedia empire growing exercises on a website and YouTube and Instagram. So he's kind of like clearly trying to become the Rupert Murdoch of the watch world. There was a couple of fairly serious flaws in his first podcast. The first was, unlike every other watch podcast I've ever listened to, he actually spoke about watches quite a bit. So I'm not sure if that's going to continue. But yeah, so anyway, Adrian was talking to a guy, Paul Thorpe. Now, that's really particularly interesting because I mentioned Paul Thorpe last week in that he's a ex-watch dealer, used to run a YouTube channel, vanished for a couple of years, has come back. There's a whole story about that. I'm not going to talk about why that is. Go check out Adrian's podcast over on Bark and Jack. There'll be a link both in the show notes and up in front of me. Yeah, so and that probably would lead you to also going to check out Paul Thorpe's YouTube channel. Paul is an incredibly knowledgeable guy, knows more about watches than has forgotten more about watches than I'll ever know. Looks at watches through a very specific lens. He is an ex-dealer, and so for him, I think it's very difficult for him to divorce the idea of what something's worth and the ability to buy and sell those watches. But he's also self-aware enough to know that, is upfront about it, and so you just sort of have to, if that's not what you're interested in, you just filter that out. So yeah, go check that out. That's fantastic. The other thing is, and this is cheating a bit, I'm going to point you to a podcast that doesn't even exist yet, but two girls, Catlin and Kat, both from Nashville, Tennessee, are putting together a podcast which will be released soon under the title 10 TENN, so as in Tennessee, and 2. I don't know Kat much at all except from Instagram. I've seen her photos. She's got a nice set of watches, seems to know watches. Catelyn, on the other hand, I know a fair bit better. First off, I've seen a lot of her stuff on Instagram, but more than that, I've heard her more than a few times on Scottish Watches. She both knows her stuff and is very funny. So I'm pretty confident that this is a podcast you'll want to catch. So yeah, 10 and 2, check it out. They've got a website. Go have a look. We'll see how you go. Yeah, so that's it for me. That's kind of the news this week. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope I pointed you in some interesting directions. I concentrated much more this week on just pointing you at things. Go off and see them. If this was useful to you, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye.